today with Lauren, we'll be going through a few things. So firstly, Lauren will begin by giving an artist talk about her practice, giving an overview of the works she's been making recently, and also talking about the work of art bottles, which is currently on display at the National Gallery in an exhibition called Know My Name Global. So Know My Name is a National Gallery initiative that showcases women artists from Australia, locally, and from around the world. So the slide we have up right now is materials, so a list of materials that you will need for today, because we'll be doing some art making with Lauren as well. If you don't have all these materials, that's absolutely fine. We're willing to be creative and adaptive, and sometimes we get some lovely surprises if we don't have everything we need. So after you do some making with Lauren, we'll have some time for reflection, and I will take you through a National Gallery learning project that the education team has developed, and we'll also be talking about our online learning strategy that we have written about Lauren's practice. So Lauren Berkowitz is an artist who I personally look up to. So here we are with her today. And on screen we have a photo of her with her work of art bottles, which was made in 1994. So what struck me when I was reading about Lauren's practice is in the early 90s, when she went to New York, she actually didn't bring any art making materials with her, which I'm an artist myself. I find that really intimidating. So Lauren made art out of what she could find, and she renewed this detritus, this litter that she would find, and turn it into works of art. And by doing that, it was an act of repairing the environment, being almost a custodian of place, caring for where she was by removing this litter to turn it into objects with new meanings while acknowledging the old meanings as well. So I'm going to hand over to Lauren, and she's going to speak to you about her practice now. Thank you, Lauren.
Okay, thank you for that lovely introduction. Okay, hi everyone. It's great to be able to chat to you all today about my creative practice and share with you my thinking process. I'm going to focus on 3 recent installations together with my work Bottles, that is currently part of the exhibition called Know My Name Global. I will talk about my concepts, influences, and how these works originated and evolved. I'm excited for you to be able to translate and reinterpret some of these ideas along with my methodology into your own works during our workshop today. Thank you for taking the time to find materials from your everyday environment for use today, and I hope that you do enjoy our activities. My most recent work, Plastic Topographies, is currently on display at the RMIT Design Hub as part of the group exhibition called The Morning After. I urge you all to see this show if you get to Melbourne, as it runs until September 20th. I think this installation strongly embodies my practice from the last 35 years and my impulse to collect. This is the 6th iteration of this work, which has grown and evolved since 2018, when it was first constructed in my studio during a 3-month artist residency in New York City. Plastic Topographies is a fantastical landscape of the imagination that is both utopian yet also apocalyptic, precarious and fragile. Colourful recycled plastic lids, cups and containers are stacked randomly into architecturally inspired structures reminiscent of a house of cards or a game of Jenga. It is an environment where plants create oxygen while sprouting from accumulations of single-use bottle lids collected from beach cleanups and neglected urban spaces. The artwork includes many plants commonly used for air purification indoors, cleansing the air of toxins to create a verdant and recuperative atmosphere. This terrain is surreal, reminiscent of a Dr. Seuss book of sleep, yet also a nightmarish vision and cautionary tale of environmental catastrophe, like the Lorax. In the Anthropocene era, plastic pollutes our air, land and waterways. entering the food chain both as packaging and in the food and liquids we consume. Animals ingest this plastic, and it really is threatening the future sustainability of life on Earth. Plastic takes up to 500 years to decompose. This artwork balances eco-grief with hope through regenerative gestures and actions. Comprised of containers, this vibrant work evokes the four seasons and the life cycle. Translucent circular lids, dishes merge into passages of white, yellow, green, black, red and orange plastic forms, while plants grow from the detritus, signaling renewal. Empty vessels evoke absence and the transitory, highlighted through the use by dates, stamped on the packaging. It's an ambiguous hybrid landscape of transition and change. In 2018, the first iteration of plastic typographies was built on site at the International Studio and Curatorial Program in New York City. When I arrived in New York, I didn't bring any materials with me, and I was very much open to what was readily available in the city and what caught my eye. I began stockpiling materials such as plastic food containers that were plentiful just from my daily consumption, and my friends kindly would leave me donations of their plastic would be left outside my studio door as a lovely gift. And every day I felt like I was acting as a caretaker, because I would make my way to my studio and I would be collecting lids which were littered on the pavement, almost like confetti. And this is pre-COVID, and I would collect these lids with my gloves on and take it back to the studio, give it a really good wash and clean, and I would start scattering these items on the floor, my studio. And so every day this work grew. It grew bigger and bigger. And there was a very strong element of chance where the acquisition of a certain vibrant lid or object would really kind of influence the direction of this work. And I was really open to and surprised by the many possibilities of random materials that entered my collection. The plants co-joined this composition when a fellow student, an Australian artist, Jess Johnson, was vacating her studio and needed someone to temporarily look after her plants. As the studio was in a highly polluted industrial area of Brooklyn, I was really delighted to have some greenery to purify the air and bring some oxygen into this space. The artwork evolved to fill and inhabit the whole studio, and it took advantage of the natural light filtering through the window. The second and third iteration of the work were at Art Space and MCA in Sydney, where I invited the staff to save their plastics. Obviously, the MCA iteration was more challenging because it was during the time of COVID, so I would receive large boxes every 3 months, which I would quarantine before I was game enough to open them, and I would give everything a really deep wash and clean. So I was very fortunate to have like a huge palette of colours to work with. In both cases, at both sites, I worked with the natural light that was available, and in both cases, we opened up windows which had been concealed to allow light to infuse into these works. At Cement Fondue, the artwork grew and became a collaboration with Indigigrow with the addition of bush tucker plants. Indigigrow is a 100% owned, run and staffed not-for-profit native plant nursery that specialises in education and cultivation of endangered species. A member of the gallery worked at the nursery and gave me permission to utilise their plants, And in addition, he did a planting workshop to educate audiences of the benefits of using these plants. And the final evolution of this work was at a sustainability fair in Melbourne that was over 3 days. So I literally had to put this work up in half a day, which almost killed me. But it was a really rewarding experience because I was showing my work alongside businesses whose focus was regenerative practices, such as recycling coffee grounds for nourishing soil. There were many First Nation businesses that were in the recycling business, and people who were doing exploration into repurposing rubber and plastics, and really involved with local communities to bring their projects to fruition. So this next work, Cyclical, was created during a 3-week artist residency at a school in Sydney between November and December last year. For me personally, this work references the rhythms of the natural world, from life cycles and seasonal change to rituals and circular economies. My work, as in other things I've shown you, they embody regenerative gestures. My residency was collaborative and experiential with both students and teachers. The work became a dialogue between the disciplines of science, art, together with a sensory and exploratory inquiry. My creative process was inspired by the materials and objects that pre-existed within the studio and school environs. The plinths, chairs, tables, books and tubs form the structural and topographical composition of the installation. Other building materials such as milk crates were dispersed around the school and also became co-opted into this imagined landscape. Materials from the Nemo theatrical production that was done at the end of the year were also repurposed. Inanimate objects were partnered with plants, seeds were planted by the pre-preps and were woven into the artwork, taking advantage of the existing light sources within the space, which was quite limited actually. There was low light, and so I contained it with the use of glass and plastic jars and bottles. The school community were involved with the stockpiling of materials, whilst students actively participated in the building of terrariums, cardboard structures and soundscapes, whilst recycling their waste paper into new paper sheets. So these hybrid objects and fragments were then kind of reimagined into my kind of organic and surreal topography. Residual Matter was a sculptural installation created last year during a 3-week artist residency in Japan at a place called Australia House in the Niigata Prefecture. And it was commissioned by the Echiko Samari Triennial with the support of the Australia-Japan Foundation. My artwork was composed of empty food and liquid containers that were salvaged by the residents over a period of 8 months. And for me, the work suggested the cyclical harvest, abundance and sustenance, but also the everlasting plastic pollution and the increasing threat of climate change to this particular region and to its food and water resources. So whilst promoting the idea of a circular economy through the recycling of materials, vibrant containers, lids, bottles and dried and living plants were transformed, reflecting upon seasonal change. The artwork was responsive to the rural landscape and was integrated into the composition with the fleeting movement of natural light and with the breeze animating the work throughout the day, and also reflecting on notions of continuity and temporality. You can see here the local people who collected all the plastic admiring the work, and I gave a talk through a translator. So it was wonderful to have the local community very much involved with this work. Remnants was created during an artist residency in rural Victoria that was part of the Dookie campus. It was an agricultural and veterinary science department that was part of Melbourne University, and I kind of acted almost like a bowerbird, collecting plant debris and plastic detritus from the landscape. And yes, this almost kind of became a taxonomy of the site, and the work was quite painterly, as you can see, in terms of its colour and texture, and very much told the history of this particular site. Fragile ecologies relates to a Kabbalistic myth of creation, where you have these beams of colourful light cascading to the floor and pooling in puddles of colour. They're almost like DNA chains, you know, the very basic units of life, yet it's all made of plastic, which, you know, is, as we know, it is very destructive to our environment. Subterranean, this work takes a viewer on a voyage into the realm of the subconscious. I created a psychological space within a small sealed room in an underground car park in King's Cross in Sydney. And it was almost like a memento mori. You can see the eggshells in the background, rose petals, salt and ivy. So I was using sensory materials to explore ideas around temporality. I was imagining heaven and the underworld whilst reflecting on immortality and the afterlife. Mana and a later version I created was called the Physic Garden. This is a work that paid homage to the previous inhabitants of Melbourne, the Wurundjeri people of the past and present, using native plants with edible tubers such as green hoods, chocolate lilies and yam daisies. Other bush foods included warrigal greens, bower spinach and sea celery, and many medicinal and healing plants. Introduced plants used in the artwork acknowledge the subsequent waves of immigrants to Melbourne. Since colonisation, lavender represented the English settlers and ginger and garlic the Chinese immigrants. Fragrant, aromatic Mediterranean herbs, succulents, fruits and fruit trees acknowledged the Italian and Greek immigrants who arrived in Melbourne in the 1940s and 60s. I spent 20 years living in South Yarra and Paran, and when I used to take my kids walking the neighbourhood, I would observe the edible gardens of older migrants in my neighbourhood. And a very familiar sight would be vegetables growing out of recycled pots on the front porch. Indian herbs such as curry leaves, Vietnamese mint and medicinal African herbs such as aloe vera reflected more recent immigration to Melbourne and a very familiar sight at community gardens. These works also reference the Chelsea Physic Garden in London that focuses on healing plants that have provided cures from herbal to conventional medicine. And since some of the plants were actually urban weeds, which many of them have curative qualities and can be quite, in some suburban areas, they can be quite useful, surprisingly, because they're edible. So yes, weeds are quite complex and have an interesting kind of story. Strata was a work that entired the entire space with coloured sands, and they were collected from a nearby sand quarry. The work quotes Frank Steller's paintings from the 1970s, together with the geological sculptures of Robert Smithson. And overlaying this abstract work is the natural history of Langwarrin, with references to soil degradation and erosion through tree clearing and stock grazing of this region. Follies were a series of sensory and olfactory architectural spaces that appeared as large-scale colour-filled paintings comprising of fresh chilies and dried banksia and lavender. This installation was inspired by the 18th century concept of the architectural folly that occupied European pleasure gardens. The folly was an absurd structure or chamber suggesting delight, terror and ecstasy. My follies were highly experiential, involving the sense of smell and touch, with each one evoking a very different response. Chilies that burnt the eyes and irritate the nose were a reminder of the disturbing impact of colonisation on First Nation people and their landscape, and the introduction of exotic plant species. Lavender, there was another undulating folly made of lavender, which you can see on my website, which was very much evocative of the scented English garden that the first settlers brought to Australia to remind them of home. The polystyrene room is made entirely from mass-produced foam crates that were washed, clean and emptied of their consumer contents, yet they bore stains and markings of their former history. It was a very awkward and dysfunctional space, commenting on the gallery, and was a homage to the expressionist artist Kurt Schwitters and a crazy kind of building he created called the Mersbau. Onion Sack Wall is currently on display at the Art Gallery of New South Wales, if you would like to have a look at this work. And for me, this evokes a series of sensory associations. It suggests a monument. It could be a monument to mourning, a wall constructed from bags containing the residue of hundreds of onions. The vibrant red and orange of the woven bags plays homage to the abstract expressionist artist Mark Rothko, whose saturated red canvases were imbued with a symbolic narrative, and he always perceived his works as having emotion and an emotional charge. It could also be perceived as a giant textile weaving or series of discarded stockings. In many of my works, there is the activity and process of weaving, sewing and knotting, and there is a reference to traditional women's work. This work, Bags, which is now in the collection of the NGA, is a very monumental scaled work and very minimal in its sparseness, and the viewer is drawn into this architectural and psychological space that provokes different responses from comfort to claustrophobia. The work has very strong visual associations with the body and could be viewed as a surrealistic and dreamlike space. The experience of occupying the interior space is almost like a giant pair of breathing lungs or a kind of metaphorical digestive tract of everything we kind of consume and eliminate. So throughout my career as an artist, I have been interested in exploring the poetic resonance of materials. And my work Bottles, that is currently on display as part of Know My Name Global, is an early work that really does investigate the poetic and sculptural potential of glass jars and containers. This work was originally configured as an 8-metre long passage of glass that undulated with an organic flowing movement, and it was originally the full length of the gallery. And often my work is very site specific. You know, it really takes into consideration the site, and often the scale is dictated by wherever I am located. And there was a large window at the end of the gallery, and there was a lot of transient light coming in throughout the day, which flickered on the surface of the work. So you can see how animated the work looks in this image. And the bottles were salvaged over a 6 to 7 month period. This work was part of a larger installation called Bags, Bottles, Newspapers. And it was an exhibition that was inspired by my rituals of domestic maintenance, including shopping, cooking, consuming and cleaning. So the work carries with it many layers of alternative meaning, including allusions to repetitive traditional women's activities and what Miralee Lederman-Euclid calls maintenance art, and the unrecognised endless daily labour of care. So this is echoed in the time invested in the process of washing the bottles, and my work embodies regenerative gestures, from the retrieval of domestic objects to the cyclical activities surrounding them. This resonates with the larger narrative of what has historically been women's labour, overlaid with the repetition of minimalism and mass consumption. The work was initially shown in the historic Love and Lewis building in Melbourne. This is where the Karen Lovegrove Gallery was located. And this was a former shopping emporium and drapery store that was the setting of passive consumption and shopping rituals for women. I mean, for me, the bottles is a very open-ended work. So I'm kind of giving you my perspective and how I perceive the work. So it evokes the passage of time, loss and renewal, and it explores the poetic resonance of quotidian materials and their transformative qualities through light, volume and space. And so, emptied of their contents, the bags and bottles have a palpable sense of absence and presence, emptiness and fullness. And within these single-use items, there's a dialogue between permanence and ephemerality. Many of the bottles have a use-by date on them, acting as a marker of time, which becomes a memento mori. And I mean, you have to look quite carefully. There are a few bottles in the installation of the NGA that still have the use-by date, but a lot of them have been scrubbed clean. But this is something I'm very much aware of in many of my installations, because on plastic bottles and jars, you always have the date stamp. So I am very conscious of the passing of time. So in many of my artworks, there's an embedded memory and history within the discarded and expendable consumer object. And over the years, I feel like I've created anxious objects that kind of have the appearance of instability. Often these transient structures speak of obsolescence and vulnerability through their delicate forms. And whilst transient light is captured both within the glass and undulating surfaces, they are forms that kind of regenerate and grow infinitely. The glass bottles are both resilient and fragile, but they lay prone on the ground and they become vulnerable. They could easily shatter. At the same time, the bottles imply growth. There are linkages with the artist Eva Hesse and her use of multiples, and it's great to see Eva Hesse's work currently on display at the NGA, and you can see it in the distance. It's behind the bottles. So I love being able to have that connection with her work, because she is someone who I've always looked up to as quite an extraordinary artist. I feel like I've always shared an interest with her use of regenerative and expressive materials. And there's a particular work that I feel that this my bottles references. It's called Repetition 19. And I think this is a really interesting reference point because her work she's created these vulnerable empty vessels that have a transparent tactile quality. Other ideas, there's a sense of containment and elimination that coexist in these objects. Again, suggestive of the digestive tract of everything we're consuming and eliminating. It's the residual remains of our daily intake. They're washed, cleaned, rehabilitated. These are objects that have been transformed. In 2017, I was invited to remake bottles at the Margaret Lawrence Gallery. And at this time, the work grew to encompass two works. One was a circular composition, and the other, the original line form. So I continued to stockpile glass, and we had an open call to the public to bring in all their glass jars and bottles that had been lying around their garages. And so we had every day people would bring in their bags of goodies for me to incorporate into my work. So the work kind of took on a new resonance and added layers of meaning. So these, you might wonder, where did all these jars initially come from? They were collected from the community, family and friends. The glass containers also hold memories, and they are the residual remains of celebrations, daily consumption and cleaning rituals. The artwork incorporates bottles from wine and alcohol beverages, as well as jars from staples such as coffee, olive oil, fruit juice, tonic water, mayonnaise and tomato puree jars. They coexist with smaller jars salvaged from my children's first years, and those hoarded by my grandmother and my aunt. Their cupboards were absolutely full of these items that they had stockpiled for reuse. These include many pickle jars from the 1950s, which I think are really quite lovely because they've got beautiful checkered patterns. So for me, these vessels these repurposed vessels embodied a kind of post-war era mentality of self-sufficiency when resources were scarce. This is a sentiment we're now returning to, and we're certainly more aware of our dwindling resources and circular economies and more sustainable practices. So moving on, this is an earlier work, but from a similar time frame, working with materials from my immediate environment, telephone books, Lonely Hearts messages, talking about built-in obsolescence and kind of life's vulnerability. Recyclable, this work appeared as a miniaturised cityscape or organic growth of waste that mutates and threatens to overwhelm the space. This work reflected on one level the spatial qualities of New York City and the excessive consumption and wastage that the city produced. And at this time, as I said, I was living in New York. So this work it's very crowded. It could be a cityscape, it could be kind of natural landscape as well. It's kind of ambiguous. So that's the end of my formal talk, and now I would like to start, begin talking to you about what we're going to do as an activity. And I am going to be building on site a spontaneous assemblage, which is going to be very much ad-libbed. So, and I imagine you've got your materials in front of you, and we're going to build together. So this is a sculptural activity that I've developed in conjunction with the NGA Education Department, and it is something that can engage children and adults. I've actually played it with my 26-year-old son, and we spent at least 2 hours really having a lot of fun with it. And hopefully it will inspire curiosity and a sense of play whilst embracing chance and unexpected outcomes. So hopefully this experience will encourage children to explore and experiment with our materials while realising their inherent qualities of transparency. So I've got a lot of transparent containers, lids from takeaway food. As you can see from my slide presentation, anything that comes into my everyday life, my waste stream, becomes artwork. So it's very hard for me to throw anything away because I start collecting it. So I have here a whole lot of strips of cardboard. I have corrugated card. I have these could be the circular rings from sticky tape, but these have actually come from the NGA. These are cylinders that canvases have been transported in, and they're quite rigid and quite a good building material. Then these smaller rolls as well, which are quite rigid. And then we have mount board, which comes from the framing department, and this has been cut so that we can slot it together. So this is very much, we're playing, we're experimenting, and this is a process that I go through every time I create a new work. And you may think that my works look very resolved, but the process to get to that resolution is often, maybe a month or two of just experimentation with materials and not being afraid to try things out. And I think that's really important as an artist, to really test out all different scenarios. And often I will try out many different things before I finally kind of realise the end product. So the secret is, do not be afraid to try out new things, and you will be pleasantly surprised, hopefully, by what you come up with. What we don't want you to do is feel like, oh, this has to come out as a masterpiece, because that's not the object of this exercise. So these are all the elements that we have. I'm not sure what you have at home, but I want you to really start playing, maybe put on some music that might inspire you, or sometimes I might listen to a story, an audible book, and start kind of just slotting things together. You might want to start cutting things. We've got these coloured pens, which are wonderful to give these fabulous vibrant colours. I've got this slotter thing, which I found online. Often I have an idea to create holes or do certain things to materials, but I'm not sure how I'm going to do it. So I might go online and just look up hole cutter, and a whole variety of things will come up which could be suitable for that, for achieving that aim. Or I might go into Bunnings and walk down all the aisles looking for something that possibly could work for the job. Or I might quiz some of the people working there and ask them how they think I should go about cutting slots into things without chopping my fingers off. So let's start kind of putting things together, and just don't expect this to be too polished, because this is pretty rough. But you know, I'm just going to just try out randomly putting a whole lot of elements together, and I want you to do the same with what you've got at home. So these slotted cards, I'm going to start slotting together. And I was actually watching a young child on the aeroplane working with circular slotted things, and it was really quite wonderful watching him play, because he was probably about 4 years old, and he was so engaged with just, you know, experimenting and randomly putting together shapes. So I love these circular forms. These have been shaded in different colours, or you can do solid colours. You know, you can have opposites, red and purple on the back. The corrugated cardboard's fantastic because it's so rigid. So I would encourage you to get, you know, cardboard. You know, something that's so readily accessible and something great that you can play around with your students. So here we're going to go. We're going to start slotting all this together, and then I'm going to see these slots here. I'm using these small strips here, and I'm going to thread them through these holes. So these are great kind of joiners. But you might find something else that you can use as a slotter, a slot cutter, apart from scissors. Whoops. Anyway, and don't mind if it kind of topples over. That's always, you know, all that movement's interesting because it might create a more interesting shape. So I hope it's looking interesting from your end. I like using transparent shapes because these kind of bring light into the composition. And often I love working in front of windows because I love the effect of natural light and reflections and different light at different times of the day, because that changes the colour of things and kind of animates the work. So in a sense, we're kind of building a work that is quite architectural, and what you want to try and do is that there's going to be a bit of a balancing act. As you start getting more and more elements together, you want to try and make the work structurally sound and kind of just hold its shape as best you can. And the whole thing might just topple over, but don't be fazed by that. Just start all over again. So it's really about experimentation and not being afraid to just, you know, try something new. And sometimes, you know, I might look at books of different artists who I find inspiring. You know, maybe go see an exhibition at the NGA or your local art museum, and that might stimulate, you know, certain colours or forms that, you know, might provoke different ways of thinking. So I think when you're making a work of art, you've got to be open to all sorts of influences. Now this is starting to take a horizontal kind of configuration, but it could also start going up as well. So it is rather precarious, so maybe I need to try and make it a bit more stable. But it would be good to try and make it go up. You could also just kind of place elements randomly. You know, it doesn't have to be attached. I mean, one of the activities is almost having a game of Jenga. Yes, these are some of the constructions I did at home, and you can see how I've used the longer strips of cardboard in this work. And here I've used plastic containers, and I've used shiny reflective paper as well. The options are limitless. So this could continue along the table as an elongated work. It could continue to grow up. It could take any form. So I really want you to be as kind of experimental as you can possibly be, and really don't be afraid to try something that you've never done before, because those often accidents kind of lead to real breakthroughs, I find. And even just randomly placing shapes. I've got these beautiful sheets of reflective paper that we can throw in there, which throw great shadows into the work. And it is becoming a little precarious here, which is kind of interesting. Yeah. I'm not sure how it's looking online, but you could probably even use toothpicks to try and secure things into place. I'm going to use some of these sticks here. So you just, with the cardboard, you need it. Oh, we've just lost something here. That's not going to quite work there. Okay. All right, this could collapse at any minute now. It's a bit tricky. So I've got all these beautiful coloured strips, which I want to kind of add to the work. You could also use a glue gun if you wish, but that's almost like cheating. There's more of a challenge doing it without glue, but if you use the glue gun, you could probably create quite a tall tower. But I think there's a beauty to actually not using anything toxic at all, and particularly if you're working with young kids, you know, you probably want to avoid using glues and things that, you know, aren't so great for your health. So, oh, there we go, we've just lost that one. Okay, all right. So I might almost leave it there, and I hope at home you've created something interesting. I might just add a few more sticks here before it all collapses. Anyway, I'm not sure how it looks from your end. It's a bit tricky doing it back to front, but yeah, I just really want you to experiment and enjoy, you know, the playful aspect of this activity. Okay, thank you everyone. Whoops.
Beautiful. Oh, Thank you so much, Lauren. That was so fantastic. I hope that everyone had an amazing time playing with their materials and made some interesting discoveries. So at the end of this PowerPoint presentation, we'll have an email address up, which is NGA Learn, so our education email address. And we would absolutely love it if you shared your creations with us as well, so we can then pass that on to Lauren. If anyone has any reflections at the moment that they would like to share in the chat, please do. I'll just be spending a moment rearranging the workspace a little, so I very much welcome contributions while we do so. Thank you. One of my personal reflections on Lauren's work was that she puts a lot of care and energy into deliberating and thinking about what happens to her objects. So while we were watching her create, we didn't just see a random coming together of this cardboard, of this plastic and of this colour. She has spent years refining her practice, deciding what these objects mean to her, contemplating why she collects them and why they're assembled like this. So we'll leave this up for the rest of the session so we can all have chances to look over it. Okay, we've had something else pop onto the screen. So this has been a fantastic insight into Lauren's process and very useful in regards to upcoming workshops I'll be running with students. I love the idea of focusing on the play of light and the way repeated materials can create masterpieces on large scales. Great, so I can see Lauren smiling off to the side at that. So now I'll take you through one of our National Gallery learning resources, which we have created here in the education team in response, in response to Lauren's work. So we'll go through that. So our National Gallery learning strategies can be found online under NGA Learn. We have many. We have works relating to First Nations art, works relating to learning resources relating to works that are in Know My Name and Know My Name Global, which I discussed earlier, and of course one for Lauren Berkowitz's work, Bottles. So one of our aims as educators is to not appropriate from the artist, but instead to make works in response. So Lauren has been very generous in sharing her activity with you all, but the one that we've developed here explores the idea of a poetic resonance. So Lauren spoke a lot about the life of the object. So we want to tap into that with our students. We want to get them thinking about the life the object might have lived, where it's going in the future, and the future we want to build together. So materials that you'll need for this are 3 pieces of paper. I've specified A4 on here, but really you can use any size you like, preferably in 3 different colors, just so you can get some lovely effects. Pencils or any drawing material of your choice, scissors and glue. So I have pencils with me today, and I also have slick sticks. So hopefully you all have your materials with you now. I'm going to jump ahead to the next slide. So the first step in our process will be to think about an object that you or somebody close to you collects. So this could be any kind of object. It could be, say, a teacup collection or a coin collection, or a lot of kids I noticed at the moment are collecting Sunny Angels and Labubus. It could even be that, so it can be from pop culture. And for something to be a collection, you don't need many of one object, right? A collection could be 2 things or 3 things. It's the intent to collect that's important. So this goes back to the idea of Lauren's practice, because Lauren herself is a collector and she spoke about that a lot in her artist talk. So we want to consider some questions when we're thinking about our object. So what makes the object special to you? Why are we collecting it? What do these objects represent? So to Lauren, her objects represented litter in the environment, and she was restoring them, giving them new life. We want to think about what role our object plays in our lives. So an object that I personally have been collecting and that we have here in my example on the screen is rose hips. So the seed pods of roses. I've been thinking a lot about a rose called a briar rose, and they're an invasive species here on Ngunnawal and Ngambri country. So it could be literally any object. And then our last question is, how would you feel if that object was lost? Which harks back to the idea of wondering why the object is important, thinking about the purpose it plays in our life. So that could be practical or emotional. So I hope that's all got you thinking about an object that's important to you. So step 2. We're going to imagine we are the object. So we're writing a stream of consciousness from the object's perspective. So thinking back to Lauren Berkowitz's work, how might it feel to have been one of those glass bottles that belonged to Lauren's grandmother, kept in a cupboard, stored in case it would become important again later? Actually, it was important the whole time. So the stream of consciousness that I wrote here is from the perspective of one of those rose hips. So it says, growing under blue sky, insects hum, petals fall from me, I turn red. So a process that I might go through with school children is a little embodiment exercise. So if you look at my hands, I could get the students to clasp their hands and give them a pull and think about what that feels like. What does that pulling motion feel like? Or what does a twinkling feeling feel like, or a stretch of the hand? What do your feet feel like right now standing on the ground? Really become embodied. And then think about your object. So what are some of the sensory details that your object might be experiencing in its life? So for example, if you were a teacup, you could imagine and write from the perspective of it being cold and damp underground as clay. So this writing exercise, this first step, it doesn't need to be a literary masterpiece. It can be jagged, short, fragmented sentences just about the object. So let's move on to the next slide. I hope this has got you thinking a bit as well. Let's see. So our next step is we are going to draw our object. So we're thinking about what that object looks like. We might not have it in front of us in the classroom. The odds are we won't. I don't have my object with me now. So we're going to imagine that object. It doesn't have to be a realistic drawing, but you could draw the detail that you remember most. That if it is a teacup, for example, you might just draw the handle of it because you can remember the way it feels in your hand. If you're drawing seeds, you might draw yourself placing them in the ground. You can draw from really any angle, and kids don't have to be, once again, realistic about it. They can be as imaginary as they like. And then step 4 and 5, you're going to cut up your stream of consciousness, and you're also going to cut up your drawing. And I tested this on children, of course, and the age group I tested them on, it was a wide range. So the kids were aged between 12 and 16. And in that group, I had a few hesitations about cutting up what they had made, but we use the point of encouragement that this is a transformation process. You can take a photo of your drawing and of your writing. Nothing's actually lost, but things are gained in the spirit of experimentation. So you can cut up your paper in any way you like, in a way that corresponds with your drawing or corresponds with what you've written. So if you've written something sharp, something maybe angry, it could be jagged. If it's organic, like rose hips, you could do flowing, wavy lines, or you could just do strips. So on a third piece of paper, you're going to start arranging what you've created. So you will place all your bits on the paper and find some way of presenting it that best conveys your meaning. So your strips of paper could be placed far apart, they could be close and huddled in together. One of the children that I tried this activity on, she decided to draw her hockey helmet because it keeps her safe, and she's collected them because you have to replace them semi-regularly to make sure that they're up to standard. And her stream of consciousness involves, why are things always flying at me? So she cut her hockey helmet in half and then had the words over it and in the gap. And to her, that represented this idea of being a protective object, but the object felt fear. So she was manifesting this fear in the object. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to keep these questions on the screen, or actually I'll take them off the screen because you're all going to watch me do the activity, and hopefully some of you have started already. But what I'm going to begin with, and this won't be a perfect rendition of the artwork, but more of an example. So as I said, hopefully you're already making, or you can begin making alongside me. We'll spend about 5 minutes here together, perhaps a little bit more. So remember the first step. We're contemplating our object, why it's important to us and what it might be feeling. And then the second step, we are writing a stream of consciousness from the object's perspective. So I'll challenge myself here as well, and I won't do rose hips again. I'll do something else that perhaps I haven't thought of. So I'll be a bit challenged coming up with a stream of consciousness. I might do maybe one of the rings I'm wearing. So I'll place one of the rings that my grandma gave me on my piece of paper and write a stream of consciousness from its perspective. So here is my ring. And let's see. Warm and soft. Warm and soft. And then my next words will be, I sit against skin. So my stream of consciousness so far is focusing on sensory details as well as where the object is, where it belongs. So warm and soft, I sit against skin. I'm carried around. Carried around. I see the world. So really, there doesn't have to be much writing, but we're focusing on thinking about, as Lauren would say, the poetic resonance of the object. We're thinking about its meaning. So warm and soft, I sit against skin, I'm carried around, I see the world. So I'll pop my ring back on so I don't lose it. And next I'm going to get another piece of paper. Place this one off to the side. And I'm going to draw that ring. So very conveniently, I have all the colors that I need. And maybe I'll take that ring off again. So I happen to have the object in front of me, but I also want to draw a bit from my imagination. So I'm drawing a circle. And the ring that I have, I'm not sure what type of gem it has in it, but I'm going to draw this gem. I'm going to add a little bit of shading. And I'm going to think back to my writing for some clues. So I said, I'm carried around and I see the world. When I think of the world, I think of the night sky. So I'm going to draw that in my image as well. So I'll draw some stars. I see the world. So this particular object, if I think about its meaning and where it's from, it was pre-COVID and the end of 2018. I had flown to Thailand to visit my family because they live there. And I was with my grandma at a market and with my aunts, and I was looking at these silly little rings. I walked off and my grandma had got it for me while I had been gone. So I wear it most days, and that's why it's an important object with the rest of my ring collection that I wear here as well from my mum and my other grandma. So I'm drawing the night sky around the ring. And I think I'm going to draw one more thing inside the ring, which is a love heart to convey the sense of love I have for my family and the love they had for me in choosing this object and deciding that it would become part of my life, something that I carry around. So, with the object that your students choose, we're going to encourage them to look and see if they can perhaps find meaning. So they, for example, might collect water bottles. What is the meaning of this? The meaning of this could be abundance. We live in a society where we have taps that you can turn on, that you can get water out of instantly, and we have this reusable object that we can carry around. So there are so many layers of meaning that we might find. The thing they collect might even be names. I've met some teenagers who change their name every month or few weeks, and it's almost like they're collecting these new identities. So it could be a theoretical thing like a name, or once again, it could be about abundance in the environment. So the ability to carry a drink bottle. I know the Frank Green ones are very popular at the moment. So now that I've done those two steps, I'm just going to move some of my things over. I have my drawing and my stream of consciousness writing. I'm going to cut them up. So I'm not sure the best way to cut these up. I did a ring. It's a circular object. It sits on my finger. So maybe I'll be a bit adventurous and I'll cut my words in a spiral or a circle and see how that works. So when your students put their piece of art together, their collage, it doesn't have to make sense. You don't have to be able to read the words straight away. It could be something that you sit with a long time and have to try to decipher as you go. You might even choose to leave out some of the words and just keep some key ones. So I could keep warm, sit, against, world, soft. You can just choose the bits that are important to you. This is a really important part of the process because it's about editing and refining your feelings. So what I would usually do at this point is I would walk around the room and see what everyone has done. I know that we all might need a bit of encouragement to cut up our own work. I think if they know from the beginning they have to cut it up, that gives them at least a bit of preparation time. So I didn't end up sticking to a circle because I wanted some of my words to be visible, but I have cut them into sections. So I have words like warm and, or I sit, soft, skin around. So I have these words now, and I'm going to cut up my drawing, which is once again a bit of a scary thing sometimes. So I'm just going to begin by getting rid of all the white space. So if you have access to colored paper, I would encourage it. If you wanted to extend this activity and take it a step further, you could get the students to bring in photos of the object that you could cut up and collage together with their drawing. You could even write a journal or diary entry about it. Here we go. Ooh, see, I really want to keep my object whole, but I'm going to do this. I'm going to take a chunk out of it. Going to cut around the stars as well. So I'm going to spend a moment arranging this on my next piece of paper, which I have here. So because the object I've chosen is centered around the idea of love and family, I'm going to place the love heart on my paper first. This is going to be my starting point, and it's going to sit at the center of my page. And then I think the word soft near the heart, and maybe the ring will start to overlap itself. Maybe warm and soft are the words I'm keeping in this page. Going to put a star up the top corner, and I'm going to, what words should we use? Warm and soft. Maybe I sit, warm and soft, like that. So I'm going to leave my page like this for now. You could extend this further as well by getting students to write, as I said, a diary entry on the page, color in and draw around it more, or even collage photos of their object onto their piece of paper. So this piece of paper becomes a bit of an archive and a memory, like a living memory of the object. So what we have on our learning resource now, I'll get my producers to swap back to the slideshow. Thank you. So we have, I also forgot to mention, we have Sam and Andrew behind my computer, and they're making this all run. They're in charge of making everything go smoothly. So what we have in our learning resources, we have inquiry questions. So this gets the students to consider deeply why the artist makes their work. They're always open-ended questions, and we try to aim for a particular age group, but often we extend it to go either way. So it could be this learning resource is aimed for secondary, but it could be passed down to higher primary or to upper secondary. So one of the questions we have here is, spend a quiet minute contemplating why Lauren and her grandmother collected objects. So Lauren obviously collects objects for a different reason to her grandmother, who was collecting them post-war. But we want to consider both these things because Lauren did inherit the bottles, and she's decided to continue their life instead of putting them back in landfill. So do you or your family have any collections or items that have been passed down between generations? And consider the importance of the things you collect and the reasons you collect them. If anyone would want to put an answer in the chat briefly, I would love to read it to everyone. For the sake of keeping it short, I may only read one or two. Once again, consider the importance of the things you collect and the reason why you collect them. Is it for art? Is it for survival? Is it to pass down to people to keep the memory alive because you believe it's important? I wonder why we collect things, and hopefully these questions will allow you to be surprised by what your students come up with, because I know personally I'm always surprised. So let's see. We have someone in the oh no, we don't. Hang on. Here we go. So we have some other questions as well. So more reflection questions. We have things like, oh, here we go. Someone said in the chat, sentimental value, memories, art making, collage, repurposing. See, that's absolutely fantastic. And we never want to, detract from the value of an object for sentimental value. So I spoke about something that was from my grandmother, for example, and I guess as did Lauren. So another thing we've put in our learning resource is, inquiry questions that lead students to think about the world, right? We want to connect art to the world, to the environment we live in. We want them to be thinkers who can be adaptive to, our changing environment. We want them to think critically. So Lauren speaks about her Jewish heritage and her interest in Tikkun Olam, which is about repairing the world through good deeds and gestures. Is there something you could do that could help repair the world in some way? This is something we want to ask students to get them creatively thinking about what they can do to make the world around them a better place. So this could be at home, in your classroom, or with friends. You can think as creatively as you want. So, you know, if you presented this to kids and said, what about the rubbish in the lake? What are we going to do about it? One of the kids might say, we create a giant net, we get in a boat and we run that net through the lake and collect all the rubbish. But maybe the net has a special sensor in it and it doesn't pick up fish. Maybe the net releases the fish automatically. So we can think as fantastically as you want. We want children thinking this way. So we have, let's see, what would our world look like if we viewed all objects with equal importance? Imagine if nothing went to landfill and we found ways to reuse and repurpose. What could this transformation look like? So, like how Lauren's thinking about this detritus that she's picked up, these pieces of cardboard, this paper, what would it look like if that was as important as my grandmother's ring, which I drew, for example? So not something to end up in landfill, but instead something that we all gave a new life to in some way. We always want scientists to think like this, right? We think, what if they could invent a bacteria that ate all the plastic up? So what if they didn't need to because we valued all the objects of equal importance? What if people could find poetic resonance in each of these? So think expansively with the children. And now I'm going to give you another moment to reflect. So let's reflect upon those questions. Feel free to type any answers that you might have into the chat. I'm going to leave you with that screen on a break for a moment while I clear this table, and we'll be back with you in a moment. Great. Thank you, everyone. I see that a few of you have had a moment to reflect in the chat. So I'm going to read some of it out best I can from this distance. But somebody has said, I collect many things, but bread tags. Bread tags is in all caps. I collect them for art, education, transformation, and transform them. About single-use plastic awareness. I am always looking for and collecting with more communities and people to be part of my projects. I do installations and smaller, intimate pieces too. If anyone would like to collect too and be part of the project. Oh, hang on, the chat's left me. And I loved Lauren's work. Okay. Sorry, that took me a bit of a moment. But bread tags. That's an interesting one. I know, they're so small.
I would love to incorporate some bread tags into my plastic typography's work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I know they are not good for the environment, and they are interesting because they've got the date stamps on them.
They're almost, yeah.
Oh,
they do,
colours,
which is perfect, just like your bottles.
Exactly. So if anyone would like to donate some to my installation in the next few weeks, I will integrate them into my work.
You almost have to give me your address so I can send you all my bread tags.
That would be amazing.
So let's see, what else have we got? Oh, people also collect bread tags. That's coming through into the chat. So since we're talking to an audience of teachers, is there anything that you want them to ask their students to consider, or anything that
well, I just think in this age where we're very conscious of our dwindling resources, I just feel like, to keep on consuming more and more things is not desirable. And if we can just be mindful of just utilising what already exists, in the art room. You don't always have to go out and buy the latest, flashiest materials. There's just enough stuff in the world that is already there that we can use, which is great sculptural material, as can be seen with this activity. And I just urge you all to kind of think more sustainably and encourage your students to do so, and hopefully to make a better world and repair the mess we've done.
Okay, so thank you so much, Lauren, on behalf of the National Gallery Education team. We have appreciated your time so immensely today and really enjoyed watching this creation come to life. Thank you.
Thank you very much.